the most audacious motorcycle to hit the streets this decade. Hayabusa. The name is taken from the Japanese peregrine falcon, a creature capable of slicing the wind at over 300 kilometers per hour.
But we need to make it better. So today we'll be doing a clutch modification and changing the ECU to a newer 32-bit ECU, which allows us to tune it via the Woolich racing software. So we'll take off the fairings to start, and we'll be doing the clutch swap out to start. So this isn't actually completely swapping the clutch, we're just eliminating part of a mechanism there, which tends to fail over time. I always like to start with a nice clean bike, so I always degrease everything before I work on anything. And you can see here the right hand side, the clutch cover, which is what we'll be removing to install a little spacer. Start by undoing all the 8mm bolts to hold the cover on. Put them aside somewhere where you'll remember. Give it a little gentle tap to break the gasket seal. And then wiggle that off. I'm doing everything with one hand here, so a little tricky. So this is the clutch basket. Undo all the clutch springs in a uniform pattern. Take out all the springs and then remove the actual clutch cover itself. I guess you could say that's like the pressure plate. These bearings, needle bearings, need to come out. Make sure that you put everything in the correct order when you take it out and when you put it back in again. Don't lose anything. Look at the rattle on that basket part itself. So that's what we're trying to eliminate. We're going to make that nice and stiff. So you'll need an impact gun for this, otherwise you won't be able to undo that nut. Here are the clutch fibers and steels. They're all in pretty good condition considering this bike's got 100,000 Ks. Removing the actual clutch basket and put everything aside somewhere safe. So we've got all these parts from Shnitz Racing. We've got the little Carpenter ring, which is what takes up the gap. Some new springs and the APE clutch brace for the stiffer springs. And a new kinetic gas stick to seal everything up once we're done. So the Carpenter ring goes on the back of that rattly little gizmo thing, and then you're going to put that rattly little gizmo thing back on there. A little bit tricky with one hand. I record everything on the phone with my right hand. And the other little piece of the rattly thing goes in there as well. Give it about 4 ogadugas and then put the fibers back in. Make sure you put them all back in the right order. Don't mess up the order of the clutch itself. Pilot bearing. Here you can see the difference between the standard springs and the Shnitz Racing springs, so they're quite a bit harder. They need to be because that little mechanism that we're stopping from working actually helps with the clutch engagement, so you'll need stiffer springs if you're going to run this. Always put a little bit of Loctite on these. I don't want them to back off while we're riding. And then cover up everything with a rag, and you need to clean off all the old gasket material. This takes quite a while. Loctite the bolts, and we'll put on the new kinetic gasket. So you can see the surfaces here are all nice and clean. Just using a little aluminium flat bar and a Scotch-Brite pad. Put the cover back on. At this stage here, I actually forgot to punch down the nut that was on the flywheel, so don't forget to do that. If you look at the position of my hand on the tool there, you can see I don't do that with the torque wrench. I just do them up until they're hand tight with my hand on the back of the spanner like that. As long as it's uniform. Alright, so this is the next part. We're going to now put on the APE clutch brace. Or is it APE or APE? I don't know how you say it. So you're going to take off the coolant reservoir, and then you install this little bracket here on the clutch slave cylinder. It stops the clutch from flexing now that you've got those really strong springs in there. Without that, you run the risk of cracking the case on the clutch slave. Now we're going to take off the flywheel, I guess. We could say it's the trigger wheel. And this is for the new ECU that we're going to put in. I'm also going to replace the pickup, the crank sensor pickup. So here's the original wheel. You can see it's got 8 teeth around it. That's on the old 16-bit ECU, but we'll be going to a 22-tooth wheel from a 2002 onwards bike. So you gotta use the rattle gun to take that nut off, and then this removing tool makes the job quite easy to get that off. And then the new 22-tooth wheel goes on, and then you're going to give it about 4 rugger-duggers. I swapped over the crank sensor, so that's the original one. Here's a replacement. I'm not going to undo the wires, I'm just going to unsolder the ends of the sensor there. Much easier. The bracket was actually slightly different, so you had to change the bracket over to the OEM one as well. New gasket, of course, you don't want anything to leak when you're doing these jobs. And doing up all the nuts. Alright, so now we'll swap out the ECU. Here's the original from the 99 to 02, and here's the 02 to 07 ECU. Note the serial numbers. There's a little bit of wiring changes that need to be happening. So looking at this diagram, you'll need to take note of the following pins to change over. It's not too hard to do, just takes a little bit of patience. Now installing a Woolich Racing USB so that we can connect the computer to the ECU, and I'll be able to load up my own tunes. USB cable and the box itself. The loom actually just plugs straight into the back of the factory harness, so it's quite handy. Everything's loomed up with the power, and the harness cable back to where I've got the Woolich Racing box, just under the rear hump. Well, that's it, and the installation of the fairings is the opposite of removal. So it's time to take this for a little test. And what I found is that it actually improved the throttle response quite a bit. It made it quite a lot nicer to ride. I had some sort of hesitation issue, and the clutch is a lot smoother. However, the clutch lever itself is quite stiff. Let's take it for a little blast.
The ultimate predator. Ultimate sport. Hayabusa. Suddenly, everything else looks like prey.